Stop. Did you know that your brain operates by a formula that's 200 years old? A German philosopher cracked the code of reality, and this will turn everything you thought about life upside down. A seed kills itself to become a tree. A slave becomes freer than the master. Crisis gives birth to breakthrough. Sounds like nonsense? This is Hegel, the very genius that even philosophers are afraid to study. But today you'll understand his dialectics in just a few minutes. Get comfortable, an exciting journey awaits you ahead. But before you begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. So, Part 1. Hegel's groundbreaking way of thinking. The core of Hegel's philosophical universe revolves around how he revolutionized the art of thinking. You've probably heard the terms thesis, antithesis, and synthesis tossed around. But it's Fichte, not Hegel, who came up with that trio. Hegel felt that such descriptions were rigid frameworks slapped onto different ideas, unlike his own perspective, which saw dialectics as emerging naturally from the essence and progression of the subject. To truly get to the bottom of Hegel's philosophy, you've got to first wrap your head around what he meant by dialectics. In the logic classes you get in school, contradictions are seen as deal breakers. If you have something that's both A and not A at the same instant, classical logic throws up its hands saying it's impossible and steps back. Hegel took a different view, seeing this mindset as a big blunder that blocks our path to truly grasping the world. To him, contradictions weren't barriers to avoid, but the fuel that propels both thought and reality onward. His version of dialectics involves evolving thought forms through their own internal contradictions into solid forms that resolve earlier conflicts. Picture planting a seed. That seed has to stop being just a seed if it's going to grow into a plant. This isn't just about breaking it down, though. The plant harbors and carries forward the essence of the seed, even as it surpasses it. Hegel coined the term Aufhebung for this, translated sometimes as sublation. It's a process that cancels, preserves, and elevates. But Hegel wasn't just talking biology here. He believed every concept, every idea, and every part of reality harbors its own challenge within it. Take the concept of being, one of the most basic ideas out there. Pure being, without any traits, ends up being the same as, well, nothing at all. Being represents the positive side, nothing the negative. And becoming is where these fuse, resolving and combining to form something new. Through this clash, we get the fuller concept of becoming, which holds both existence and non-existence in a dance. This isn't just some esoteric exercise. Hegel saw this pattern playing out in human life all around. Look at how freedom has progressed in societies. Old empires with strong, centralized power symbolize a thesis, which clashed with the rise of personal freedoms and democratic ideas as the antithesis. The modern state, trying to strike a balance between central power and personal rights, comes out as the synthesis. All-powerful tyranny or absolute chaos can't last on their own. It's by grappling with these contradictions that societies evolve into something better. Take technology in today's world too. The breakneck pace of tech as a thesis has changed our lives, but also brought issues like privacy threats and job loss as the antithesis. The ongoing synthesis involves figuring out how to use technology wisely, enhancing lives while addressing these drawbacks. We can't just welcome or reject tech entirely. Growth comes from engaging with these contradictions, finding blended solutions that capture the upsides and tackle the downsides. Hegel's dialectical approach is revolutionary because it sees contradictions as a way to generate progress, not destroy it. Since distinctions evolve on their own, Hegel's thinking doesn't need some out-of-nowhere idea to appear. The shift to new understandings comes from what's already there. This gives his philosophy a kind of built-in logic, setting it apart from random opinion or mere speculation. Unlike Plato's unpredictable dialectics, Hegel's approach doesn't pull in anything unnecessary. It grows from the essence and direction of its own subject matter. Each stage brings about its own set of challenges, leading to resolutions. Hegel describes this as a self-propelling concept, a kind of thinking that advances by its own logic, without outside help. The philosopher's role, according to Hegel, isn't about crafting witty arguments, but following where the concepts guide you. This method is why Hegel's philosophy stands as a cohesive system, rather than a hodgepodge of unrelated ideas. In his philosophy, every idea plays its own part and contributes to the overall framework, much like each organ in a body keeps the organism alive. You can't just pull out one of Hegel's ideas and pretend the others don't matter. It's akin to how Einstein shook up the whole realm of physics by challenging Newton's views on space and time. Everything else had to be reevaluated. Hegel's concepts are all interconnected, and they depend on one another. His method of dialectics explains why he didn't buy into the usual notion that truth is just about ideas matching up with external objects. If the world changes and grows through contradictions and their resolutions, then our way of thinking should mimic this process to truly understand truth. Truth, in Hegel's eyes, is about seeing how everything fits together as a whole, not just gathering random facts. Reality isn't just a bunch of separate items. It's a lively, interconnected whole where everything relates to everything else. In Part 2, The Journey of Consciousness, Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit takes us on a fascinating trip, showing how human awareness goes from its simplest beginnings to complete self-knowledge. This isn't about how our minds grow like in psychology, but rather a logical deep dive into the steps our consciousness needs to go through to truly understand reality. It's sort of the gateway into Hegel's whole philosophical world, laying out how we can actually know anything about the world around us. It's a brilliant piece of work, but also notoriously tough to wrap your head around. Hegel kicks things off with what he calls sense certainty, which is basically our immediate gut feeling we get from experiencing things through our senses. Our everyday thinking makes us believe that this direct sensory experience gives us rock-solid knowledge. We look at something and confidently say, "This here now," thinking we've nailed the raw truth. Yet Hegel pulls the rug out from under us, revealing that this seemingly straightforward awareness actually involves complicated universal ideas. The terms here, now, and this aren't as particular as we think. They're universals applicable in many situations. We realize that this supposedly specific awareness is actually grounded in universal concepts. As consciousness struggles to cling to raw sensory experience, it begins to understand that this direct knowledge is actually a complex mix. The concept of here turns into a complicated map of space, now becomes a timely puzzle, and this transforms into a conceptual framework. Our understanding reaches a point where it can't clearly split the sensory experience from the ideas we use to make sense of it. This realization nudges consciousness to the next phase, perception, where we straightforwardly acknowledge what we notice and the traits it holds. But perception isn't a smooth ride either. It comes with its own set of puzzles. We try to see objects as being units with multiple traits, but then we hit the snag of how something can be both one unified thing and a collection of traits at the same time. Take a grain of salt, for instance. It's white, cubic, sharp-tasting, and dissolving all at once. How does one thing hold all these features together without them splitting into fragments? Consciousness finds itself bouncing between thinking unity is in the object and thinking diversity comes from its own act of perception, and then flipping that when things get tricky. This back and forth makes it clear that consciousness can't keep subjective impressions and objective qualities entirely apart. The hiccups in perception propel consciousness toward understanding, aiming to grasp the core essence or force behind what we see on the surface. It clicks that truth isn't in touchy-feely contact or observed traits, but in the laws and forces that stir the pot of reality. At this stage, scientific discovery steps in, where we learn to explain visible stuff via invisible players like gravity or electromagnetic fields. Yet even this understanding hits a roadblock. It treats these laws and forces as if they roam around independently of us, without acknowledging that consciousness plays a part in figuring them out. Then we reach a game-changing moment. Self-consciousness. Here, consciousness finally wakes up to the fact that it was part of the whole journey all along. The things it thought it was just finding out about were actually shaped by its own thinking processes. This aha moment turns consciousness into self-consciousness, fully aware of itself as the player in its own knowledge quest. But right away, self-consciousness runs into a new hitch. If everything it knows is sculpted by its own actions, how does it sort real knowledge from mere personal invention? It wants to be sure about its own existence and nature, but realizes it can't hit this target solo. Introspection won't cut it when there's no external measure to gauge its claims. This limitation nudges self-consciousness outward, seeking interactions with other self-aware beings. This shift from isolated self-consciousness to mutual recognition is where Hegel lays down one of his deepest insights. True self-knowledge gets its validation in the acknowledgement from other self-aware beings. I can't just proclaim myself to be rational, free, or deserving of respect out of the blue. These things have to be acknowledged by other rational beings who can make similar claims about their own qualities. Being self-aware isn't something you achieve on your own. It's something that happens through acknowledging and connecting with others. This need for recognition explains why the journey of understanding ourselves can't just stay focused on individual thoughts, but has to explore deeper social and cultural experiences. Our self-awareness grows as we engage in and share different practices, institutions, and lifestyles that tackle how we understand each other. Later parts of the phenomenology explore this growth, taking us through phases like ancient Greek ethical life, Roman legal awareness, medieval Christianity, the rationality of the Enlightenment, and German idealist thought. Each period offers unique ways of grappling with how individuals can find real knowledge and true self-identity. This journey reveals that our consciousness and the world around us evolve together in a single interconnected process. We're not just uncovering objects that are already there, but actively participating in shaping what is considered real and objective. Similarly, objects aren't just out there on their own. They're always experienced through consciousness, influenced by the ways in which we think about and perceive them. This understanding challenges the old philosophical idea that knowing something is simply about the interaction between a person who knows and an object that is known. Hegel argues instead that the boundaries between subjectivity and objectivity aren't distinct, but are part of a larger, unified concept he calls absolute knowledge. Part 3. The Battle for Survival. The most talked about part of Hegel's phenomenology is the intense showdown between two self-aware beings that come across each other as if in a natural habitat. This gripping tale has fueled revolutions, inspired theories in psychoanalysis, and sparked discussions in post-colonial studies. Yet its true meaning goes beyond just political uses. The story of the master and slave sheds light on the crucial groundwork of mutual recognition essential for real human connections. It highlights that freedom and self-awareness aren't things you achieve on your own. They call for ongoing give and take with others who are just as free and self-aware as you are. Imagine two self-conscious individuals facing off in the wilderness, each firmly believing they call the shots in the universe. Before crossing paths, each one thought their personal wants and decisions were the absolute truth. But now they each encounter another being making the same claim to universal truth. This sparks an instant clash because not both can be the ultimate standard. One has to either bow down to the other or force the other to admit their superiority. What results is a life or death duel where each person risks it all to show they value recognition more than just staying alive. However, if one dies, the chance for recognition dies too. A dead person can't admit they lost. So, the fight must end before anyone dies, leading one to decide that submitting beats dying. This sets up the master-slave dynamic, where one gets to be the master and the other takes on the slave role. The master has shown that freedom means more than life itself, and the slave has revealed that living is more important than freedom. Yet this win for the master is hollow because it wrecks the recognition he aimed to achieve. Recognition only counts when it comes from someone who can freely give or take it away. When a slave is forced to admit the master's supremacy, it doesn't truly validate the master's worth. The master ends up with empty recognition that lacks depth. Plus, the master increasingly leans on the slave to meet all material needs, losing the independence that initially defined the role as master. It's like the master becomes trapped in their own victory. On the surface, the slave's situation seems bleak, but hidden perks are there that can turn things around completely. For starters, the slave holds on to the fear of death, staying connected to humanity's basic limits. The master, having shown superiority over death, loses sight of this key human aspect. Secondly, the slave has to work to meet the master's needs, building up skills, knowledge, and the discipline to control urges. Thirdly, by dealing with a stubborn material world, the slave learns how to shape nature to suit human aims. Through this work, the slave gains real skill and self-discipline. Most importantly, the slave finds a reflection of themselves in the fruits of their labor. The products they create carry marks of their intelligence, capability, and intentional actions. This kind of objective self-recognition doesn't depend on the master's nod of approval. The slave figures out that they've literally crafted the world around them, turning raw nature into a human space. This self-realization through work offers the slave a deeper sense of self-awareness than the master's empty control. The table turns completely when the slave realizes that the master's power hinges entirely on the slave's ongoing willingness to toil and submit. The master lacks real skills, useful knowledge, and any direct link to life's material conditions. As the slave becomes more capable and aware of themselves, the master's hold starts to crumble. True mastery belongs to those who've gained control over themselves through a disciplined approach to life, not those who simply exert power over others. But Hegel doesn't just stop at flipping that concept on its head. The power dynamic between master and slave is shaky at its core because neither side gets the recognition they truly need. The master ends up with hollow approval from someone he sees as beneath him, while the slave becomes more aware of themselves and finds it harder to put up with being controlled. Eventually, both sides come to see that real freedom is found in mutual respect, moving away from the master-slave setup to better social and political structures. The master-slave idea sheds light on a few important truths about us as humans. First, things like self-awareness and freedom aren't things you're just born with. You have to earn them through struggle and keep them through constant effort. Second, you can't force true recognition. It has to be willingly granted by others who can offer genuine acknowledgement. Third, true independence means realizing we rely on each other and interacting with others in the physical world instead of just asserting ourselves. Fourth, work and discipline aren't just about making a living. They're key to developing human freedom and self-awareness. These concepts still impact political thought, psychology, and social critique today. Part 4. So, at the top of Hegel's philosophical mountain stands this big idea called the absolute. Now, don't think of it as some magical force. It's more about the idea that everything out there, thoughts and things, people and objects, the small and the infinite, are actually just parts of one big interconnected reality. This is reality in its truest form, especially when we can think about it in a way that cuts through all our usual narrow viewpoints and gets to the core of how it all clicks together. To really get what Hegel means by the absolute, you got to see how his whole philosophy fits together like a well-oiled machine. The absolute isn't something you can just walk up to and meet face to face. Our limited human understanding always catches things in slices, like subjective versus objective, or mental versus physical, and we never quite piece together how they belong to some deeper unity. Normally, we get stuck in thinking these differences are set in stone, which tricks us into seeing the world as made up of totally separate places. But the absolute? You can only find a way to it by going through a methodical process that reveals how every point of view ends up clashing with itself and only makes sense when combined into something bigger. Hegel starts his system with this super simple idea, pure being, which has no specific features at all. This feels like a rock-solid place to kick things off because it makes zero claims for people to argue about. But here's the twist. Pure being is basically the same as pure nothing, since neither has any content. This little puzzle pushes us to the idea of becoming, where being and nothingness join forces in an ongoing process. So, starting from this basic seed, Hegel digs up more and more complex ideas purely through thinking. Each idea has its contradictions, pushing us onward to a better version of it. Hegel's work, especially the science of logic, tracks these developments across three big stages. First, you've got the logic of being, which looks at immediate ideas that seem to stand alone, like quality and quantity. Then there's the logic of essence, which gets into how these ideas depend on one another, with things like cause and effect showing up. Finally, the logic of the concept shows that these relationships are really woven from the threads of thought itself, forming the inner reality of everything. But this whole mind game can't capture the fullness of the absolute. Eventually, these pure ideas have to step outside themselves to really complete their journey. That's where nature comes in, to show these logical ideas in the real world, where they're part of space, time, and matter. The philosophy of nature follows as complexity builds from basic elements through to more advanced stuff like chemicals and life forms, each step bringing greater organization and self-awareness. In nature, we hit the peak with living creatures shaped to survive and adapt. But even the smartest animals are caught in a loop of basic needs and physical routines. The big leap happens when life gets smart enough to understand itself. Welcome to the world of spirit and human awareness, where consciousness, culture, and freedom rule. Spirit is that whole big idea returning to itself, wiser from its trip through the world, but now knowing itself as the root of all existence. In the philosophy of spirit, we see consciousness grow from its simplest beginnings to the heights of what it can achieve. Subjective spirit delves into how individuals develop their sense of self, starting from their basic sensory experiences and moving through self-awareness to reasoning both in theory and action. Objective spirit, on the other hand, looks at how social and political structures help people recognize each other and achieve shared freedom. At the pinnacle, absolute spirit examines the deepest kinds of human understanding through art, religion, and philosophy. Each stage represents a more complete form of self-awareness and realization of the absolute. In Hegel's philosophy, every component is fully understood only in the context of the entire system. Logic, nature, and spirit aren't separate entities, but different aspects of one evolving reality. Logical categories lay the framework for natural and spiritual growth. Nature provides the means for logic to express itself, while spiritual acts give conscious awareness through which the absolute comes to understand itself as both logical and natural. This setup is truly circular, with each part depending on and completing the others. This circularity explains why Hegel's idea of the absolute isn't a fixed endpoint, but an ongoing journey of self-evolution and self-realization. The absolute is not only the substance, but also the subject, not just the result, but the activity, not merely the product, but also the process. It doesn't find completion by reaching a final destination, but by recognizing its endless potential to differentiate and restore itself. The absolute is an eternal path of venturing out and returning enriched from each round of expressing itself and then contemplating itself. This approach makes Hegel's system dynamic and ever-changing, rather than just a well-structured system. Part 5. All right, let me break it down for you. Hegel's science of logic is a gigantic endeavor in philosophy that tries to dig deep into the basic building blocks of thought and reality by simply following the flow of ideas. This hefty piece of work wants to prove that the way we think about stuff isn't random. It's actually a system that develops on its own through necessity. And it's not just about how we typically think. It's more about how our thinking needs to evolve to really and truly grasp the nature of the world around us. This logic stuff is basically the backbone of Hegel's whole philosophical framework, and it's one of his toughest, most debated writings. Hegel starts things off with what he sees as the simplest concept: pure being. Why? Because it looks like a good, unbiased jumping-off point for philosophical musings. If you're aiming for systematic understanding without making random leaps, you start with something that doesn't assume anything specific, literally just being without any details attached. But here's the kicker. This concept that seems so wide open and free of assumptions is actually its own downfall. Pure being, when you dig into it, is basically the same as pure nothingness. When you strip away all characteristics of something, you end up with a big fat zero. And that's where the first twist in the logic story kicks in. Being and nothing are like two sides of the same coin, flipping back and forth because neither has any particular features. This back and forth dance of being and nothingness is precisely what ushers in the concept of becoming. Imagine it like a transformation, where being turns into nothing and vice versa. This isn't just a shapeless change. It's more like a birth-death cycle, where things pop up from nowhere and then disappear again. Becoming finds its place as the initial solid concept, richer than being or nothing alone. since it kind of wraps them both up. But becoming isn't stable. It sparks off its own series of developments. Eventually, becoming leads to something definite, a specific kind of being that emerges from the constant change. This is determinate being, or existence, which is more grounded and specific than the initial airy-fairy being stuff. But here's the snag. Determinate being isn't smooth sailing either, because having specific traits means it's limited by what it isn't. So being definite also means not being something else. And this brings in the element of negation, or opposition, right into existence. The logic drone zips around from there, carrying us through more and more intricate ideas like quality, quantity, and measure. Each one springs from the troubles wrapped up in the previous concept. Quality deals with what makes something the specific thing it is, right at its core. But hang on, qualities can shift without messing up the essence of what that thing is, leading us to quantity, where differences are just matters of more or less. Quantitative thinking seems more stable. After all, numbers don't lie, right? But without qualities, numbers are just hollow. Likewise, without numbers, qualities are aimless. Measure steps in to pull things together, where numbers actually start to mean something in terms of quality. The storyline shifts as we move from the logic of being to the logic of essence. The table turns from looking at things as standalone to framing them as part of a web of relationships. Essence is all about these interconnections, where everything is defined by its relations to everything else. It dives into categories like identity and difference, cause and effect, substance and accident. Each one peels back another layer, showing that things we think of as independent are really just points in a vast network of connections. Essence is like a reflection of itself, a being that has moved beyond just existing as it is, and now lives through how it connects with other things. In the logic of essence, we come to see that all these connections are basically the way our thoughts work. Things like cause and effect, substance and accident, identity and difference, they're not just structures out there for us to stumble upon. Instead, they are ways our thinking outlines and shapes what we call reality. Discovering this brings us to the logic of concepts, the final step where thought acknowledges that it's the generator of all these ideas it's been working with. This part of logic isn't about how thoughts relate to things outside, but about how they relate to themselves. It deals with categories like universality, particularity, and individuality, which reveal how concepts work on the inside. A universal idea shapes itself through specific cases and comes to life in individual instances. But saying an individual is just a simple example of a universal rule isn't quite right. When we truly grasp a concept, the individual both holds and showcases the universal, while the universal finds expression through these specific instances. This interplay creates what Hegel refers to as the self-determining concept, where thought builds its own content via its own actions. Hegel finishes with what he calls the absolute idea. This isn't some giant concept holding all other ideas within it, but rather it's the whole system of conceptual growth, showing how thought gets to truly understand itself by building all the necessary frameworks for complete grasp. Yet reaching this logical endpoint is also a fresh start, because this absolute idea has to manifest itself to become real. This marks a move from just logic into nature, where these logical principles pop up in the world as space, time, and matter. In this way, logic serves as the groundwork for interpreting both the workings of nature and the growth of the spirit. Part 6. All right, so let's dive into Hegel's idea of nature without getting bogged down by too much philosophical jargon. Basically, Hegel's philosophy of nature is his big attempt to get a grip on the natural world. But he doesn't see nature as something completely separate from our thoughts. Instead, he believes it's like the idea showing itself off in space, time, and matter. This doesn't mean he's saying nature is just a figment of our minds or that physical stuff isn't real. What he's getting at is that there are logical patterns in nature that we can understand if we dig into their deep, underlying concepts. In this philosophical outlook, nature demonstrates how the ideas we explore in logic actually show up in the real world around us. And when these ideas express themselves in nature, It's a whole new ballgame compared to when they're just pure logical thoughts. See, logical thoughts develop step by step out of necessity. But nature? Well, it's full of random stuff and outside influences that mess things up a bit. What Hegel calls nature's weakness. Unlike logical thoughts, which unfold perfectly, natural things depend on all sorts of factors you can't predict just by using your brain power. Even though nature might seem a bit all over the place, it's not just chaos. Hegel breaks it all down, showing how things go from the simplest natural forms to more complex ones that start almost thinking for themselves. It's similar to what happens in logic, moving from basic existence to understanding relationships and then to becoming self-aware. In nature, this isn't just a mental exercise, though. It's a literal timeline of how forms pop up and evolve. Each new level of natural form is better at being independent and less reliant on outside factors. The philosophy of nature is split into three big sections. The first one deals with mechanics. Think space, time, stuff, and movement. Here we see the most basic expressions of logic where everything just is because of external forces. Space and time create the stage where everything plays out, but they're pretty much empty until matter steps in to fill them. Matter brings things to life by sticking around in space and lasting through time. And movement is the first sign of something deciding for itself, even though it's still at the mercy of outside forces. Next up is physics, which looks at things that have more going on inside. Processes like magnetism, electricity, and chemical reactions are all about stuff that keeps itself together by being different yet connected. A magnet, for example, isn't just a hunk of material sitting there. It makes its own rules and interacts with other magnets in a kind of dance. And when it comes to chemistry, elements show even more independence by playing specific roles in various substances and reactions. They take on a kind of logical behavior where their universal traits decide their specific actions and existence. The last and most advanced part of the philosophy of nature is all about organic life. Here, natural beings hit the jackpot with true individuality and self-determination. Living things don't just react to the world around them. They engage with it. A plant or a critter isn't merely a fancy arrangement of molecules. It's a self-sustaining entity that keeps its identity by constantly growing and changing. This organic individuality stands as the ultimate example of self-reliance in nature, balancing self-interest with external relationships. Even the most advanced forms of life are still bound by the limits set by nature. Living things can keep themselves alive and have offspring, but they're stuck in a cycle of fulfilling immediate needs and repeating biological patterns. They react to their surroundings but lack the ability to change them based on logical goals. They can reproduce but aren't able to create truly new ways of living. Most crucially, they don't have the capacity to be aware of themselves or recognize their own creations. These limits hint at something beyond nature, steering us toward the realm of spirit, where the idea comes back to itself as self-aware freedom. Hegel delves into how life leads us to consider death as the inevitable end for all living creatures. In his view, death isn't just the stopping of biological functions. It's the natural boundary that highlights both what natural individuality can achieve and where it falls short. While a living being can achieve unity and focus on itself, this can't last forever under natural conditions. Death shows that the individual, limited by nature, hints at the possibility of a type of selfhood that can go beyond these constraints. This realization sets the stage for moving from the philosophy of nature to the philosophy of spirit, where the idea reaches self-awareness and true infinity through human freedom and cultural growth. Within Hegel's system, the philosophy of nature plays a vital role. Firstly, it illustrates how logical concepts can take shape in reality without losing their logical essence. Secondly, it shows that natural processes follow patterns that can be understood, even when they seem random and determined by external factors. Thirdly, it lays the groundwork for comprehending humans as part of nature, who are nonetheless able to go beyond natural limits through reason and freedom. Lastly, it explains why spirit isn't just a part of nature, even though it arises from natural development. The philosophy of nature, therefore, acts as a bridge between abstract logical thought and tangible spiritual existence. Part 7. The last piece of Hegel's philosophical puzzle focuses on the realm of the human spirit. Here, the grand idea comes back to itself as self-aware freedom, achieving thorough self-understanding through the progression of human culture. This spirit isn't a ghostly supernatural force, but is about human awareness, society, and culture, viewed as the peak of rational reality. In this concept of spirit, those logical building blocks that at first seemed external become fully self-aware and can dictate their own paths freely. Humans are natural creatures that have pushed past their natural limits by realizing they are thinkers, choosers, and creators. The philosophy of spirit maps out this journey of self-awareness, starting from basic levels and reaching its zenith in art, religion, and philosophy. The development of the spirit follows a familiar pattern seen in Hegel's work, moving from straightforward existence through relationships outside of itself to an endless self-referring state. The idea of subjective spirit digs into an individual's consciousness, showing how it grows internally from basic feelings to both theoretical and practical reasoning. Objective spirit turns the spotlight on the social and political setups through which people gain mutual acknowledgement and freedom as a group. Absolute spirit dives into those top-notch cultural feats where humans grasp their essence and their spot in the grand scheme of reality. Every tier marks a more complete realization of human autonomy and self-direction. Beginning with subjective spirit, it starts at the ground level of consciousness, much like when a soul is naturally tied to its body and surroundings, similar to animals. Yet the human soul carries within it a spark, the potential to become self-aware. This spark ignites as the soul embarks on a journey of differentiation and starts to recognize itself. True consciousness emerges when the soul sees the line between itself and the objects around it. Although at first this is more about external relationships than true self-knowledge. The growth of consciousness steps through stages laid out in the phenomenology of spirit, from the certainty of senses through perception, understanding, into self-awareness. Still, the philosophy of spirit offers a more orderly insight into consciousness, honing in on the logical framework rather than just the journey. Consciousness steps into theoretical reason once it spots its conceptual role in the objects it perceives, grasping that objectivity is pretty much built through subjective thought. Practical reason shows up when consciousness realizes its ability to change reality to fit rational goals, shaping the world to match its intentions. But subjective spirit isn't quite complete if it continues living separately from other conscious beings. An individual can master theory and practice, but can't legitimately claim rationality and freedom without being recognized by other equally rational and free beings. This pushes the subjective spirit to move beyond itself into objective spirit, where people set up collective institutions embodying their shared drive for rational freedom. Objective spirit is more than just a sum of individual minds. It's a societal reality thriving on personal involvement, but transcends any single person. It unfolds through three primary phases, each offering a more fitting form of mutual acceptance and collective freedom. To start, abstract right establishes the basics for social living, a legal backdrop that lets individuals interact without stepping on each other's freedom. Things like ownership rights, agreements, and criminal laws lay the groundwork for society, but function as outside boundaries instead of true ethical commitment. Morality aims to base these social bonds on personal moral belief rather than external legal pressure. Aiming for just personal morality doesn't quite cut it, as it doesn't have a solid backbone and fails to give a dependable ground for people to work together in a society. Because of these shortcomings, there's a push toward what's called ethical life, where personal beliefs and the reality of social structures mesh well together. This ethical life plays out through three core institutions that lay down the path for humans to truly thrive. First up is the family, acting as the space for immediate ethical togetherness rooted in love and natural feelings. It's in families where folks get recognized and backed up without needing to constantly think about morals or rely on laws. Yet family ties are only specific relationships and can't offer the universal support needed for more complex social setups. That's where civil society steps in, as people chase their own interests through business trades and community groups. This sphere gives freedom and variety, but it's not without its share of clashes and imbalances that private dealings alone can't fix. The state is where it all comes together, balancing individual interest with universal rationality. Hegel didn't just see the state as a law-enforcing body or a protector of personal rights, but as the living embodiment of a community's dedication to rational freedom. In this setup, people find personal fulfillment and global acknowledgement by engaging in bodies that reflect their shared rational character. The state isn't just about the government. It includes all the ways a community organizes its shared existence: education, professions, culture, and religion. These offer the groundwork for individuals to hone their skills and genuinely find themselves by contributing to society's well-being. Nonetheless, even the best thought-out state is hindered by its specific historical roots and can't fully explain human self-awareness. This hurdle leads to something beyond the objective spirit, pointing towards absolute spirit, where humans surpass all limits and attain total self-realization through pursuits like art, religion, and philosophy. Absolute spirit is more about spirit looking at itself than engaging with the outside world or finite social constructs. It's here where humanity grasps its true essence and its place within the grand scheme of reality. Part 8, The Science of Freedom. Hegel dives into political philosophy in his Elements of the Philosophy of Right, offering a deep, impactful take on how the state is the pinnacle of human freedom and rational decision-making. Unlike liberal ideas that see the state as a sort of necessary nuisance limiting personal freedom, Hegel flips the script, saying real freedom is achieved by engaging with rational political systems. In his view, the state isn't some random entity restricting freedom, but is actually the framework that enables true freedom. To really grasp Hegel's provocative idea, we need to get a handle on his concept of freedom and why he thinks it depends on political systems rather than just doing whatever you want. Hegel starts his political theory by dismissing the usual idea that freedom simply means no one's telling you what to do. This so-called negative freedom, just being able to act on whims without interference, is actually more of a slavery to random desires and situations. If you're only following impulses, you're not really free. You're stuck under the thumb of stuff you can't control. Genuine freedom, he argues, is all about following rational principles, not just going with gut reactions. This kind of positive freedom is about being disciplined, acting based on reason rather than cravings, and setting goals that go beyond immediate self-interest. But you can't achieve this rational self-determination all on your own. Hegel's philosophy of right outlines how freedom evolves in three key stages, each representing a better form of self-determination. First, there's abstract right, which lays down the basic rules for freedom by recognizing people as individuals who can own stuff and make agreements. Property rights give folks control over things, helping them achieve their goals. Contracts allow people to work together voluntarily while keeping their independence. But this abstract right is pretty dry and formal. It sets up the stage for freedom without ensuring people will actually use their rights to truly self-determine. It can protect freedom but can't create it. Then there's morality, which tries grounding freedom in personal moral beliefs instead of external laws. It suggests true freedom comes from following duty, not desires, acting on universal principles rather than personal wants. Kant's categorical imperative is a good example, demanding people act only according to principles they'd want everyone to follow. Yet Hegel believes purely formal moral principles are too vague to guide real actions. The categorical imperative warns against contradictions, but doesn't spell out what goals to chase or how society should be organized. Plus, personal moral views are subjective, so there's no guarantee everyone's moral ideas will match. These issues push the evolution of freedom beyond just rights and individual morality, heading toward ethical life. Here, rational principles are embodied in real social structures. Ethical life blends personal moral beliefs with concrete social reality, offering freedom through shared practices and community roles. Unlike abstract right, ethical life gives freedom substance, clarifying the roles and duties through which people find fulfillment. It also goes beyond personal morality by providing a solid basis for principles through established social institutions. Hegel sees ethical life developing through three essential institutions that set up comprehensive paths for human growth. The family comes first, showcasing an immediate ethical bond built on love, trust, and caring. Family ties go beyond just being biological or legal. They are moral connections that forge true communities among people who understand they rely on each other. In families, parents, kids, husbands, and wives all find fulfillment by committing to the family unit instead of chasing only personal ambitions. However, family connections are specifically focused and can offer the broader framework necessary for today's complex social lives. While families lay the groundwork for ethical growth, they can't cover all the relationships and activities that lead people to self-fulfillment in the modern world. When individuals step out of the family bubble, civil society is formed. It's within this realm that people pursue their personal interests via businesses, professional networks, and volunteer groups. This opens up immense possibilities for personal growth and social cooperation, as people with a mix of skills and interests find ways to work together in intricate webs of exchange and interaction. Yet with civil society comes new challenges, such as conflict and inequality, which could threaten the moral fabric of social life. The competition found in markets could exploit divisions and lead to social breakdown, while the focus on personal gain might weaken dedication to the greater good. Therefore, civil society needs rules and ethical direction from outside to keep from tearing apart its own foundation. The state stands as the pinnacle of ethical living, where personal motives and universal ideals merge harmoniously through well-thought-out political systems. Hegel's vision of the state isn't just about enforcing laws or safeguarding individual rights. It represents a community's devotion to sensible freedom. A true state lets people achieve personal joys in universal acknowledgement by engaging in systems that highlight their shared rational essence. The state comprises constitutional frameworks ensuring political involvement, educational setups that boost rational abilities, economic strategies that work for the overall benefit, and cultural avenues that encourage ethical growth. By engaging in these frameworks, citizens experience freedom, not in spite of political duties, but through them. Political involvement becomes a way to realize oneself rather than a burden of sacrifice. Part 9. The trickiness of reason. Hegel's take on history is his big shot at figuring out some sort of logical order in what first seems like a chaotic jumble of events. Instead of seeing history as just random occurrences or an incomprehensible plan by a divine force, Hegel proposes that it actually follows a logical path we can understand through philosophical thinking. In history, the journey of human freedom is about humans gradually building social and political systems that are more and more rational. This evolution isn't a result of people sitting down to plan it all out. It's more about what Hegel refers to as the cunning of reason, where rational outcomes sneak out of conflicts driven by individual interests and passions. What really pushes history forward is the deep-rooted human need for recognition, the urge for others to see and honor your freedom and dignity, especially when they're also free and responsive to recognition. This need inevitably sparks conflicts, since different groups have clashing views on what should be recognized and how. These skirmishes shake things up and push societies to create new systems and practices to deal with the problems of the old ones. Historical progress, in Hegel's view, follows a dialectical pattern, where contradictions prompt new syntheses that save the good parts and fix the flaws of older systems. Hegel splits world history into 4 key stages, marking how human freedom and self-awareness develop. The first era, the Oriental world, is like humanity's early childhood. Here only one person, the ruler, is truly free, while everyone else is stuck in a state of servitude. While Oriental societies achieve a type of political unity and cultural advancement, they miss out on recognizing individual freedom, which Hegel deems crucial for true human progression. Then comes the Persian Empire, which begins to rise above this limitation by integrating various cultures. Yet it still clings to a despotic power structure. Next, there's the Greek world, symbolizing humanity's adolescence. This is when individual freedom pops up, but it only extends to certain communities and fails to achieve universal acceptance. The Greek city-states open doors to political engagement and cultural growth like never before, but simultaneously exclude many from citizenship and lean on slavery for economic reasons. Their idea of freedom, though beautiful and immediate, lacks the universal ideals required for an inclusive society. The Greek attempt to merge individual and community interests eventually breaks down when faced with more diverse and complex political scenarios. Then we move into the Roman era, marking humanity's adulthood. Here, Roman legal and political structures stretch across a vast area and acknowledge every free person as a legal entity, no matter their cultural roots. However, this universality is mostly theoretical, offering equal rights on paper, but no real freedom or sense of community. The Roman Empire, stitched together through military might and efficient governance, can't foster the ethical connections that make political involvement a personal fulfillment rather than an obligation. Lastly, there's the Germanic world depicting humanity's maturity. The focus here is on the notion of infinite subjectivity introduced by Christianity, which comes to political life through constitutional monarchy and modern ethical standards. Christianity reshapes human self-perception by valuing every soul equally and allowing for a reconciliation between divine and human finiteness. But turning these spiritual ideas into political realities took centuries. Key milestones in this journey include the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution, each playing a vital role in promoting universal human freedom and dignity. The French Revolution is a prime example of both the strengths and weaknesses inherent in the Germanic world's take on freedom. On the one hand, the revolution did a great job of tearing down the old system's unfair perks and outdated institutions, setting a new standard that political power should be grounded in rational agreement rather than just following old traditions. But on the other hand, it also showed the dangerous side of applying broad, universal ideas when they're not filtered through actual institutions and ethical connections. The terror illustrates the chaos that can occur when revolutionary zeal tries to force ideal freedom by instantly applying logical principles without consideration for existing social ties and cultural norms. Hegel views the constitutional monarchy of his day as a balanced approach, keeping the revolution's dedication to universal freedom while steering clear of radical democracy's overly abstract nature. This kind of monarchy blends public involvement with stable institutions, protecting individual rights while promoting social unity, rational ideas alongside historical customs. The monarch acts as the state's symbolic figurehead, while elected officials offer democratic validation, and professional bureaucrats ensure efficient governance. This system allows people to engage in rational political life without having to abandon their personal connections and cultural backgrounds. However, Hegel doesn't stop at political evolution. His view of history also covers the full spectrum of cultural achievements. He believes that art, religion, science, and philosophy all follow historical paths that demonstrate logical progression. Each cultural domain reaches its pinnacle at certain historical times, which provide the right context for its growth. For instance, Greek art, Christian religion, and German philosophy stand as the greatest accomplishments in their respective cultural fields. This isn't to say that subsequent eras are worse. Rather, it recognizes that different cultural expressions peak under varying historical circumstances. Philosophy's mission, then, is to grasp how each era contributes to humanity's journey towards self-awareness and freedom. Part 10. So right at the top of Hegel's philosophy, you've got this thing called absolute spirit. This is the part where humans get to really grasp who they are through the coolest stuff they create, like art, religion, and philosophy. These three are the big ways we get to understand ourselves and how we fit into this grand reality. Unlike the limited stuff you see in individual minds or society, absolute spirit totally breaks free of any constraints and knows itself in a truly infinite way. Each of these forms is a unique path to self-discovery, yet they all aim to figure out how everything, thought, reality, the finite and infinite, human and divine, are interconnected. Art jumps in as the most direct and tangible form of absolute spirit, where truth showcases itself as beauty. In real art, universal themes find their voice in earthly materials, creating creations packed with meaning, not just simple representations. Great artworks don't just echo abstract notions. They make the spiritual feel real and tangible to whoever looks or listens. When we dive into genuine artistic beauty, we sense the union between the universal and the personal, the infinite and the finite, in a visceral way. Although art gives us the first peek at absolute truth, it's still stuck with using physical forms instead of pure ideas. Hegel takes us through art's journey in three major phases, each showing different ways spiritual depth meets with its physical form. Take symbolic art, like Egyptian pyramids and sculptures. These pieces hint at deep mystery and power, but struggle to fully capture their spiritual weight in their forms. Then comes classical art, which peaks with Greek sculpture, merging spiritual depth beautifully with the sculpture's form. Think of those Greek statues of gods and heroes, perfectly melding human beauty with deep spiritual themes. But this perfection also cages the spirit since it's locked into what can be shaped physically. Romantic art outgrows this boundary, realizing that spiritual content can't just be boxed into finite forms. Christian paintings, medieval architecture, and modern poetry show spirit's deep internal nature, yet also highlight how external depictions fall short. Romantic art dives deeper spiritually than classical art, though it lets go of perfect physical beauty. As romantic art matures, it starts veering towards religious and philosophical understanding, suggesting that its job as a sole bearer of absolute truth is wrapping up, without implying art's end, but its rise into superior spiritual expressions. Now let's look at religion, the second way absolute spirit shows itself. Here, absolute truth appears through stories and feelings, not just pure physical beauty. Religious thought fuses the finite and infinite via tales, symbols, and rituals, touching the whole person rather than just through visual pleasure. Religion goes deeper than art, since it openly acknowledges the limitless nature of ultimate reality. Still, it's not the ultimate answer due to its reliance on symbols and narratives over logical clarity. Religious truth comes out in tales of divine deeds instead of systematic ideas. Hegel shows us how religion moves through stages like art, each one getting better at addressing infinite reality. First, there's nature religion. Think pantheism and animism, finding divine elements in nature, but not clearly separating limited and limitless. Then you have religions that focus on spiritual individuals, like Judaism or Greek polytheism, acknowledging divine transcendence but keeping a clear line between human and divine realms. The unique aspect of Christianity is the idea that it merges human and divine through the incarnation doctrine, where God takes human form. This belief elevates Christianity to a peak in spiritual understanding because it recognizes that an infinite spirit manifests through our human existence. The incarnation showcases God becoming human so that people can embrace their divine potential, not by changing externally, but by realizing their spiritual essence. The death and resurrection of Christ demonstrate how the finite and infinite gaps are bridged, recognizing that limitless life comes from rejecting mere finitude. The Holy Spirit embodies infinite spirit living within the faith community, acknowledging their divine connection. However, even Christianity, with its profound religious insight, still relies on stories and doctrines that evoke belief, not pure rational comprehension. Unlike straightforward philosophical reasoning, these symbols indicate truth indirectly. This inherent limitation suggests that philosophy is a more complete expression of truth than religion. Philosophy grasps the same truths, but does so through clear concepts rather than belief-based images or stories. It marks the pinnacle of understanding in Hegel's philosophical framework, presenting truth as fully transparent through pure thought without needing sensory or external validation. Philosophical thought is truly infinite as it understands itself as the root of all its terms and concepts. Philosophers don't find truth somewhere out there. They realize that rational thought is the fundamental reality underpinning all existence. This awareness completes Hegel's philosophical vision by showing that the system's starting categories are the true structure of reality. Through philosophy, absolute knowledge is attained, where thinking recognizes itself as both its own focus and result. Part 11. The Drama of Recognition. Hegel places the idea of recognition at the center of his views on human nature and society. This isn't about just wanting approval or validation from others. It's about how humans come to truly understand themselves and find freedom. You can't figure out who you are on your own. You need others to recognize and validate you to really know yourself. Without this recognition from others, genuine self-awareness and social progress can't happen. Recognition is the foundation that supports everything from personal identity to societal structures and cultural achievements. The quest for recognition starts with the fact that human consciousness is self-referential. Unlike animals, which are merely aware of their surroundings, people are aware that they are thinking beings. This self-awareness, however, brings up a problem. The self can't really confirm its traits or value without external input. If I say I'm rational or worthy of respect, it's just my opinion unless others, who are also rational, agree. So our self-awareness pushes us to seek recognition from others. But recognition isn't something you can force or trick out of someone. It has to be freely offered by people who could choose not to give it. Real recognition comes from individuals who are rational and free, not from those who are coerced or unable to make meaningful judgments. This creates a paradox. We need others' acknowledgement to validate our freedom, but it only counts if those others are free too. Thus, the struggle becomes about creating a situation where mutual recognition is possible. Hegel illustrates a basic and flawed attempt to solve this issue with the master-slave dynamic. Here, each person tries to prove their superiority in a battle that risks all for recognition. However, when the master wins, he gets fake recognition from the slave, who is forced to admit defeat, which isn't real validation. The master's victory is hollow because it lacks genuine affirmation, while the slave's acknowledgement is meaningless because it's coerced. The failure to secure recognition through domination leads us to search for alternatives built on mutual respect and reciprocity. Stoicism, for instance, offers one path: achieving self-respect by turning inward and relying on rational self-conviction instead of external validation. This approach gives a sense of freedom through accepting life as it is, but it's abstract, focusing more on internal dignity than changing one's environment. It keeps a person resilient, but doesn't help foster conditions for true human development. Skepticism takes the Stoic approach even further by questioning everything about the external world. This leads to a sort of extreme independence, shunning all beliefs or values that can be challenged. But this too is flawed because it gives nothing positive to cling to. The skeptical mindset stays free from error by not committing to any beliefs, making it empty and disconnected from reality. This becomes what Hegel calls the unhappy consciousness, caught wanting certainty but unable to find any solid ground for belief. The unhappy consciousness marks an important step in understanding oneself. It shows how relying purely on oneself for recognition isn't enough. It highlights the need for a communal approach to truly grasp the essence of recognition. Picture this. There's a feeling known as the unhappy consciousness, where you find yourself caught between your ever-changing everyday life and this dream of something way bigger and unchanging, like ultimate truth. It's like looking up towards something that always seems just out of reach, kind of like how medieval Christianity paints a picture of the split between life on earth and the heavenly realm. This split leads to a never-ending sense of longing and a habit of self-denial as you try to break free from your life's limits through things like strict discipline and deep mystical experiences. But here's the twist. Eventually, the unhappy consciousness comes to understand that finding that infinite recognition isn't really about solo spiritual quests. The infinite isn't in some far-off, untouchable place. It's actually much closer in how we connect with each other and what we achieve together culturally. This dawn of realization nudges you from solitary spirituality to joining in on shared practices and institutions, where humanity's collective achievements come to life. In this shift, true recognition isn't about escaping the reality of our finite lives, but rather about building things right here that showcase our limitless human potential. This journey takes you to the realm of reason, a place where you see yourself mirrored in the real world. Here you find out that the ways we think about reality aren't just things we've made up in our heads. They actually click with how the world truly works. This epiphany paves the way for real knowledge that's not just personal opinion or the say-so of others, but a fusion of how we think and reality itself. Through reason, we lay the groundwork for science, moral understanding, and creative arts by proving that human consciousness can reach objective truth through rational action. However, as rational as we might become, there's still something missing if we're just operating as individuals seeking recognition from others doing the same. The true culmination of recognition happens when we build institutions and practices that reflect mutual respect and rational freedom in tangible social forms. This is the realm of spirit, where acknowledgement and collective self-fulfillment become part of society through family ties, community involvement, political activities, and cultural growth. All in all, recognition is the key to grasping Hegel's whole philosophy about how humans create spaces for mutual respect and shared fulfillment. Part 12. Hegel's philosophical journey is hard to grasp unless you take a good look at how he got along with Immanuel Kant, the big shot who basically set the stage for all the German philosophers who came after. Kant's way of thinking is like the pinnacle of Enlightenment ideas, and it also sparked the idealist movement that Hegel eventually became known for. In Hegel's eyes, he's the guy who's taking Kant's revolution a step further by tackling the dualities and setbacks that stop Kant from really nailing down systematic knowledge. By digging into Hegel's critique of Kant, you can get a sense of what drives his own philosophical project and what makes his idealist approach tick. Kant shook up the world of philosophy with his Copernican revolution, which flipped the script by saying that the things we know should line up with our knowledge instead of the other way around. In the past, both empiricists and rationalists thought that our minds had to somehow reflect or match an independent outer reality, leading to all sorts of tricky questions about how our limited minds could actually understand an infinite reality. Kant cracked this problem by saying we can only know things as they show up to us, shaped by our ways of intuiting and understanding that mold all experiences. Stuff like space, time, cause and effect, and substance aren't properties of things on their own. They're essential frameworks of human thought that make experiencing anything possible. This game-changing idea lets Kant ensure we can have true knowledge, but at the same time, he narrows it down to just what we can perceive. When it comes to the natural world, we can claim certain knowledge because those natural things are formed through the same mental frameworks we use to think about them. Scientific knowledge gains its objectivity not by mimicking the outer world, but by applying universal thought categories to what we sense. However, the downside is that in doing so, Kant leaves the true nature of things in themselves a mystery, setting up a big divide between the knowable world and the hidden, mysterious realm beyond our mental grasp. While Hegel praises Kant for recognizing that knowledge is about actively engaging with cognitive structures, he thinks Kant doesn't quite follow through on this insight. The split Kant left between what we can know and the unknown isn't solving much. It's just creating more issues. If we say that the things in themselves are totally unknowable, how on earth do we even know they're there, or that they cause what we perceive? This whole idea of an unreachable reality that affects us clashes with Kant's own rules about sticking to what's within our experiential reach. More to the point, Hegel thinks Kant is seeing these categories of understanding as just made-up forms we slap onto reality rather than realizing they are the backbone of reality itself. This artificial split between how we organize our thoughts and what we think about stops us from truly understanding anything. If we say these categories are just how we arrange our experiences, then knowledge stays stuck as subjective and can't really call itself objective knowledge. Kant saves what we perceive, but sacrifices the unknown, making both sides kind of empty and unbalanced. Hegel's take is to do away with this mysterious thing in itself and assert that reality is fundamentally conceptual. The categories aren't just our lenses, but they are the real logical infrastructure that brings reality into being. Thinking and being aren't identical because reality gets twisted to fit our thinking, but because both our thoughts and existence follow the same logical evolution. This way, Hegel can hold on to Kant's idea of active knowledge, minus the dualities that trap Kantian philosophy. Even in morality, Kant's approach, despite showing deep understanding about ethical duties, runs into similar hurdles. His idea of the categorical imperative does a great job highlighting the formal framework of moral reasoning by insisting on universal rules that honor everyone's rational freedom. Kant was big on the idea that morals should be universal, but this approach left his moral philosophy without clear guidance on what our specific duties are or how society should be organized. The categorical imperative he proposed tells us to avoid contradictions and treat people as ends, not means. However, it falls short when it comes to outlining exact duties or offering a blueprint for societal and political life. Kant's approach is filled with broad, sweeping principles that don't really help when you're faced with real-life ethical decisions. On top of that, Kant drew a hard line between doing what we ought to do and what we want to do, which made it seem like living morally was always a battle against our instincts. This setup doesn't quite get that moral growth isn't about just squashing our desires, but transforming them. A real ethical life should blend reason with emotion, making sure duty and desire work together instead of being at odds. Although Kant hinted at this blend, his focus on universal principles and abstract independence couldn't quite make it happen. Hegel came in with a plan, trying to build on Kant's ideas but within a more fleshed-out system that tackled these shortcomings. For Hegel, understanding concepts wasn't just about applying personal interpretations to external stuff, but more about them being steps in a logical process. Moral ideas take shape in the framework of actual social setups, moving beyond just universal notions. Hegel thought the clash between our natural selves and our free, rational selves could be resolved by seeing spiritual freedom as an extension of natural development. Even though Hegel critiqued Kant, he also had full respect for the groundbreaking work Kant achieved. Things like the spontaneity of our thinking, our ability to act independently in moral matters, and the organized nature of philosophical knowledge all set the stage for what Hegel wanted to do with his own philosophizing. Kant's insights made room for idealism by showing that understanding reality has to come from rational thought structures, not just what we see around us. So, Hegel saw himself as building on Kant's ideas, pushing them to their logical limits rather than discarding them. Part 13. The Struggle of Separation. When you dive into Hegel's work on consciousness, there's nothing more gut-wrenching and insightful than the notion of the unhappy consciousness. This is a state where someone feels torn and estranged from who they truly are. It's a pivotal point in our journey to understand ourselves, and many folks out there can definitely relate to this feeling in their lives. This inner turmoil hits when you can't find the affirmation you're looking for from the world around you, and so you start looking inward for something bigger, something infinite, that's always just out of reach. This sets up a kind of religious mindset, totally out of sync, where us humans and the divine are like oil and water, just not mixing. This whole unhappy consciousness vibe comes into play when the old ways of living ethically get shaky. Think of the old Greek way of life, where everything was in this nice balance between individuals and society. When society stops giving people the recognition they need, they're left to fend for themselves, trying to find worth in their own small corners instead of out in the open. But here's the catch. Just thinking about yourself isn't enough because we need others to acknowledge us. So people end up on a mission, craving approval from something or someone beyond the limits of our world. This often means putting immense value in an otherworldly realm that's forever apart from regular human life. You're caught in a bind. You're living a finite life that's messy and ever-changing, aware of something infinite and unchanging that seems perfect. Everything in your regular life, your body that gets sick and ages, your emotions bouncing all over the map, your thoughts that are never quite certain, and your successes that feel fleeting, all seem lacking when compared to this ideal. This push and pull creates a never-ending loop of denying yourself and aiming for something more. It's like chasing a mirage. You're trying to leap over the boundaries of your own limitations. A historical example of this is seen in medieval Christianity. But Hegel's points apply to any mindset that feels caught between the bounded and the boundless. Christians see God as all perfect and infinitely loving, which makes human life, seen as finite and flawed, look even more inadequate. The gap between perfection and reality becomes the sore point Hegel calls the painful feeling of separation. Here, instead of helping bridge the gap to the divine, one's own existence feels like a stumbling block. So, folks start trying to close this distance through intense religious practices, fasting, celibacy, self-denial, and pulling away from everyday social life. These are meant to strip the consciousness of earthly shackles and set the stage for meeting the infinite. But ironically, every step taken to rise above human limitations only highlights the divide it seeks to erase. Desperate for meaning and connection to the vast beyond, the unhappy consciousness turns to service, surrendering completely to divine will, hoping this will unite them. These acts sometimes bring moments of feeling accepted and cherished despite flaws. Yet these aren't lasting. They hang on emotions, not a true understanding of human and divine interconnection. In the end, this cycle of struggle and partial peace continues, searching for the elusive balance between what is and what could be. A heart that's deeply devoted swings back and forth between moments feeling God's presence and times feeling his absence, creating even more turmoil than logical doubt. The big issue with what's called unhappy consciousness is that it sees the limitless as something out there, separate from everyday life, instead of realizing that the infinite is the core truth of our own finite existence. It shifts all positive value to a realm beyond this world and views real human life as negative, something to get past rather than embrace. This mindset keeps us from seeing how our own longing for infinite things actually shows that the infinite resides within our finite world. The fact that we, with our limited perspective, can dream of and aspire to the infinite indicates that it's not just an external reality, but the deepest truth within our finite lives. Hegel talks about unhappy consciousness as something essential for human growth, but also as ultimately falling short as a complete way to understand oneself. This state of mind plays a vital role by highlighting the limits of only recognizing our immediate, finite reality and pushing us to ponder the bigger questions about life's meaning. It forces us to think about the differences between the finite and the infinite, stopping us from getting too comfortable with society's norms that might be shallow or limiting. We need to experience this state of unhappiness to reach the kind of deep self-awareness that true spiritual maturity requires. However, at some point, this unhappy consciousness has to see that its thirst for infinite recognition won't be quenched by turning away from earthly life. The infinite it yearns for isn't some far-off entity, but is woven into human relationships and achievements, provided we see them in their true light. This realization transforms unhappy consciousness into reason, showing us that instead of looking for approval from outside, we can find our identity mirrored in the world around us. Moving past unhappy consciousness marks a key turn in our spiritual growth. The understanding that our finite existence is a tool for limitless realization, not a barrier. Nowadays, this unhappy consciousness pops up whenever there's a split between how people live and the dream image they hold of themselves. It can show up in non-religious ways too, like when people fantasize about perfect love, jump on political bandwagons seeking quick change, or follow philosophical ideas that see life as just an illusion. Examining Hegel's thoughts on unhappy consciousness gives us a lens to view these modern feelings of alienation and guides us towards better ways of balancing the real and the ideal, the finite and the infinite. Part 14 dives into the fascinating world of needs and work. Now, civil society is a concept Hegel really nailed as far as predicting future twists and turns in social and political theory. He explored that middle ground where economic interactions and voluntary groups pop up between the family unit and the big state machinery. In modern lingo, we're talking about market economies, professional gigs, social classes, and all those institutions that let folks chase their personal goals while staying in touch with the bigger picture. Hegel's ideas were ahead of their time. It's like he laid the groundwork for stuff Karl Marx would later expand on about capitalism. But Hegel gives us a more balanced view by weighing both the good stuff and the pitfalls of our modern economic world. If you want to get Hegel's take on how personal freedom jives with social unity, grasping civil society is your first stop. Civil society kicks off when folks step out of that snug family unit and start chasing their own dreams, mingling with people they don't exactly have a warm and fuzzy family connection with. This marks a big leap in human freedom, letting people hone their unique talents and goals instead of sticking to those age-old family expectations. In this realm, interactions are mostly about being producers and consumers, bosses and workers, buyers and sellers, rather than fitting into roles laid out by family ties. This shift opens up a whole new world of possibilities for individual growth and team-ups made by choice, not by birthright or some governing force. But here's the kicker. While it opens doors for freedom, civil society also stirs up its own set of challenges. Pursuing personal interest without a care for the bigger picture can lead to outcomes that nobody really wins from, potentially stifling individual success entirely. The rat race of economic competition might cause exploitation, widen inequality gaps, and even make society feel like it's falling apart at the seams. Plus, the never-ending quest for profit can often steamroll over what's good for people and the planet. This is the paradox, or what Hegel calls the dialectical character, where chasing personal liberty can create a world that actually curtails freedom. Hegel breaks down civil society into three key areas: the system of needs, the judicial system, and the interplay between the police and corporations. The system of needs is all about the economic dance we do to meet material needs, relying on each other's varying skills and resources. It covers the whole shebang: making, sharing, using, and swapping things, the lifeline of complex societies. The justice system sets the rules of the game, protecting rights and making sure chasing personal goals doesn't throw collaboration under the bus. Meanwhile, the police and corporations are tasked with tackling the social hiccups popping up from business, aiming to make sure civil society boosts human well-being rather than tearing it down. Now, the system of needs is a mixed bag. On one hand, it's impressive how labor division and voluntary trade can bring diverse talents and interests together to do more good for everyone than when people just fend for themselves. A bustling market can create and share wealth on a scale that's tough to beat with rigid planning or traditional community sharing. Market relationships give a nod to individual choice, letting folks pick their jobs, friends, and lifestyle choices instead of having these dictated by some old-school power or political edict. But watch out. The same system also spawns inequality and instability that can threaten its very existence. Some folks end up rich, while others hit hard times, and it's not always because of how hard they work or how talented they are. Often it's due to things they can't control, like changes in the market, new technology, or even the circumstances they were born into. These gaps in wealth can snowball because having money helps you get a good education, build a network, and find cool investment chances that people without cash just can't access. Plus, the economy has its ups and downs. Sometimes there's too much of something being made, not enough people buying, or risky financial decisions that end up wrecking whole communities. This leaves a lot of folks who want to work sitting at home because there aren't any jobs. Hegel sees that simply being a good person or relying on the market won't fix these issues. We need systems in place that tweak how the economy works. The justice system gives us laws that outline and protect what belongs to whom, make sure people stick to their agreements, and deal with those who cheat or steal. But just having laws isn't enough to handle the bigger social mess that comes from money inequality and economic shakiness. This is where what Hegel calls the police steps in. And he doesn't mean just cops. He's talking about all kinds of public policies designed to steer the economy for everyone's benefit. This police power includes setting rules for businesses, providing social safety nets, ensuring education for all, and guarding the environment. Basically, everything governments can do to make sure private interests aren't running amok at the expense of society. Then you have corporations, but not like modern businesses. Hegel's version is groups of professionals banding together based on their job fields. These aren't just companies, but guilds, trade groups, and other setups where people with similar jobs look out for each other. They offer a sense of community and support you won't find in regular buyer-seller relationships. These groups give people a place to belong beyond just their families, but without needing them to engage fully in politics. Hegel's deep dive into how civil society functions shows why just having market relationships isn't enough for people to really thrive, even if the economy is running smoothly. At the end of the day, markets treat individuals as a means to an end, rather than as people worthy of respect and acknowledgement. True community and recognition can't be fully achieved through economic dealings alone. Civil society leads us to look to the state as the entity that can offer that universal acknowledgement while keeping the best parts of personal freedom and diversity alive that civil society encourages. Part 15. No thinker has shaped social and political ideas quite like Karl Marx. The way his historical materialism interacts with Hegel's idealist dialectic is one of those philosophical debates that's layered and quite debated. Essentially, Marx said he flipped Hegel's ideas right side up. Hegel focused on the play of ideas, but Marx believed it was really the development of material forces that steered history. However, Marx himself admitted he owed much to Hegel, saying he took the sensible parts from what he described as the mystical aspects of Hegelian thought. Grasping this connection is key to appreciating the lasting impact of Hegel's ideas and seeing how Marx's materialism is carved from them. Marx's journey in thought starts with diving deep into Hegel's take on politics and history, notably when it comes to ideas like alienation and the search for recognition. As a young guy, Marx agreed with Hegel about how humans find fulfillment by creatively transforming the world. However, he criticized Hegel for sticking to philosophical musings and not diving into the tangible conditions shaping human progress. For Marx, real people, first and foremost, need to meet material necessities through their work before worrying about lofty cultural endeavors. This shift from focusing on ideas to focusing on the material led Marx to reimagine Hegelian concepts without ditching their dialed-in structure. Take Marx's concept of alienated labor. It mirrors Hegel's master-slave scenario, but zeroes in on economic roots rather than just purely conceptual ones. In a capitalist system, workers are disconnected from what they produce, from their role in the manufacturing process, from their own nature, and from each other. This isn't just a headspace problem. It's about the hard facts of who owns what and how work is structured. Here, workers find themselves in a paradox like Hegel's slave. They create value yet end up feeling powerless. Marx pointed out that Hegel's view was still too philosophical, since it blamed awareness rather than looking at material roots. For Hegel, freedom happened when a slave recognized their own labor's impact on the world. Marx, though, insisted that simply realizing this wouldn't change the real-life conditions of being dominated and exploited. True freedom means not just seeing the world differently, but actually changing the material world of production. This realization is why Marx saw the need for revolutionary action, not just thinking, as crucial for human liberation. Marx kept the framework of Hegel's historical dialectic, but shifted the emphasis from consciousness' growth to material productive forces' evolution. He believed history moves because of clashes between production forces and production relations, basically between the means of making wealth and how control over production is distributed. When these forces grow too big for the social structures containing them, it sparks revolutionary change, birthing new relationships that can handle increased productivity. This dialectical movement is what Marx thought drove history from simple communal living through slavery, feudalism, and eventually capitalism, moving towards a socialist and communist future. In examining capitalism, Marx put Hegel's methods to work by highlighting internal contradictions that would ultimately spell capitalism's doom. Capitalism sets itself up for its own downfall by pulling workers into massive factories where they start seeing shared interests and unite for joint action. The race for profit pushes tech advancements that boost efficiency, but also lead to unemployment and lower profit rates, sparking financial crises that expose how absurd it is to prioritize profit over people's needs. At its core, capitalism builds a working class with nothing to lose but their chains, and everything to gain from a complete overhaul of the social system. Yet Marx doesn't just adopt Hegel's ideas, he also critiques the idealistic foundations and methods. Marx claims that Hegel's absolute spirit is really just an ideological mirror of current social ties, not their ultimate truth, and it tricks people into accepting unjust conditions by making them seem rationally necessary. Hegelian philosophy benefits those in power, giving intellectual backing to the status quo and discouraging real attempts to shake things up. The owl of Minerva, spreading its wings only at dusk, highlights philosophy's conservative nature, understanding major changes only once they're outdated. Marx also takes issue with Hegel's method of staying in the realm of abstract ideas instead of dealing with real-world material conditions. The Hegelian dialectic moves through books and thoughts, resolving contradictions via intellectual combinations rather than real-world actions. This mindset leads to false peace, where real-world conflicts are settled in minds, but not in life. Marx emphasizes that true dialectical methods should involve practical actions that actually change social connections instead of just grasping them intellectually. It's about shifting from merely interpreting the world to changing it, which calls for stepping beyond just philosophical musings into active political engagement. Even with these deep criticisms, Marx sticks with some Hegelian ideas and techniques throughout his deep dives into economics. The way capitalism plays out in Marx's Capital reflects the same ongoing clash and resolution pattern found in Hegel's logic, but rooted in material, not just theoretical interactions. Marx's study of how commodities are seen as more than they are ties back to Hegel's look at consciousness, mistaking its creations for separate entities. The revolutionary change Marx dreams of aims to end alienation and lay down the groundwork for true human self-fulfillment, resonating with Hegelian ideas about recognition and liberty, yet firmly planted in material reality. The dialogue between Hegel and Marx continues to shape modern social theory and action. Liberation causes, thinkers, and radical philosophers still tap into both Hegelian and Marxist teachings, while discussing how material and cultural elements drive social shifts. Grasping this link is key to understanding the current importance of dialectical thought for tackling today's social issues and envisioning different institutional setups. Part 1. 6. To Hegel, art in its highest form is something that belongs to the past. This doesn't mean that people will stop making or enjoying art, but rather that art can't be the main way we express our deepest understanding of reality and human life anymore. In today's world, religion and philosophy have taken over as the top ways for cultural expression, leaving art a bit unsure about what it's supposed to do or where it's headed. To get why Hegel felt this way, you need to grasp how he saw art evolving through history and how it links to the growth of human awareness and cultural life. Hegel didn't see art as just something pretty or entertaining. To him, real art was about revealing truth. True art brings spiritual ideas to life through tangible forms, letting us see big truths about humanity in those specific shapes. When we experience great art, we're not just admiring something beautiful, we're getting a glimpse of the core realities of human life. According to Hegel, the best art achieves what he calls the sensuous appearance of the idea, meaning it shows infinite spiritual content through limited physical forms. This truth-telling aspect is what sets real art apart from just craft work, entertainment, or simple aesthetic enjoyment, even though these are still valid parts of making art. Hegel laid out that art has gone through three big phases, each showing a different link between spirit and form. First, there's symbolic art. Think of Egyptian pyramids or giant sculptures. These try to express something infinite that can't really be fully captured by any form we can see. They give off a powerful sense of the mysterious and sublime, but they struggle to fully convey their deeper meaning. Symbolic art hints at meanings that go beyond what they can physically show, creating a tension between what you see and what it tries to express. Next, there's classical art, which reaches its peak with Greek sculptures. Here, there's a perfect balance between spirit and form. Greek statues of gods and heroes show ideal human beauty while fully capturing their spiritual meanings without any leftover or lacking bits. Classical art achieves what symbolic art could only dream of, a complete harmony between infinite meaning and finite looks. But this is also where it hits a wall, since it can only show spiritual ideas that fit into beautiful forms, leaving out any deeper spiritual matters. Lastly, there's romantic art. It breaks free from the limits of classical art by understanding that infinite spiritual ideas can't be fully boxed into any physical form. Christian art, medieval architecture, and modern poetry show this depth by highlighting the shortcomings of trying to externally capture what's inside. Romantic art digs deeper spiritually because it explores inner life, conscience battles, emotional complexities, and the dance between the finite and infinite. But with this deeper spirit comes a loss in sheer beauty and formality. As art grows more spiritually accurate, it leans less on pure aesthetics and more towards religion and philosophy. This evolution of romantic art leads to what Hegel calls the dissolution of art, where art starts reflecting on itself more than expressing ultimate truths. Modern art gets wrapped up in playing with forms, making ironic statements, and questioning its own roots rather than simply laying out spiritual ideas. Artists today have become more self-aware about the history and the confines of their craft. As a result, their work often engages with past artistic traditions instead of purely tapping into the current spirit of the times. This self-awareness allows for sophisticated artistic creations, but it also highlights how art has drifted from its original role of revealing deep truths. The idea that art has reached an endpoint doesn't mean that people will stop creating or that modern art lacks significance. Rather, it suggests that art isn't the go-to method for cultural understanding anymore. In older civilizations, art was the main way that societies showcased and passed down their core beliefs about the world, human nature, and life's purpose. Works like Greek tragedies, medieval cathedrals, and Renaissance paintings did what we now expect philosophy, science, and religion to do. Nowadays, we have separate places and fields dedicated to finding out what's true, beautiful, and good, instead of mixing these pursuits into one artistic endeavor. This separation means we can reach greater heights in each area, but it also leads to cultural divides and a sense of distance from the big picture. With science claiming truth, moral philosophy taking on goodness, and art sticking to beauty, people might struggle to weave these areas into a meaningful life. The fading of art's role as a unifying force contributes to what many see as the spiritual dilemma of modern times, where finding an all-encompassing meaning in life is tough in a world that's so focused and compartmentalized. Hegel foresaw many of these modern worries about how aesthetics, science, and morality intersect and interact. His thoughts on art's supposed end hint at a brighter future for human culture. As art steps back from being the ultimate cultural guide, it leaves room for other expressions that don't have to uncover fundamental truths, but can freely explore the wide scope of human experiences. Current discussions about art's place in democratic societies, how aesthetics and politics mix, and what cultural institutions should stand for still grapple with themes Hegel pointed out. Even if some don't agree with his historical views about art, his perspective offers valuable insights into how art, culture, and society interplay and evolve. Part 17. All right, so Hegel's take on aesthetics is one of the most in-depth and structured efforts in the history of philosophy to get to grips with what makes art beautiful and how it's tied to truth, morals, and our spiritual growth. While some might see art as just a personal outlet or a pretty extra to life's practical matters, Hegel stands firm that art gives us true insights about reality through our senses rather than just through ideas. So, when we engage with beautiful things, it isn't just for enjoyment. They open a window to the core structures of existence, feeding our perception and emotions in ways that pure thought can't quite match. What's cool about Hegel's approach is how he ties these ideas into detailed breakdowns of different art forms, all while keeping them linked to his bigger philosophical ideas. His foundational belief is that beauty is like the sensory display of the idea. So art is where abstract concepts and spiritual truths are made visible and easy to experience directly. True beauty in art isn't just about colors, sounds, and shapes playing nice together harmoniously, though those elements do have their role. It's really about material forms conveying deep spiritual content. When universal ideas find a voice in the particular, when infinite truths become visible to our limited perception. This takes not just technical skill in art, but also a rich understanding of the spiritual messages the art is trying to deliver. Hegel's structured method to aesthetics digs into both the overarching nature of aesthetic experiences and the nitty-gritty details of different art modes. His general take looks at what beauty actually is, how creating art fits into the bigger picture, and how we balance seeing things aesthetically with theoretical or practical viewpoints on life. Then he dives into the specifics, chatting about architecture, sculpture, painting, music, and poetry, showing how each has its own materials, techniques, and ways to express itself. Each art type has its timeline, and it's linked to the cultural grounds they grow from and achieve their best forms. Architecture, for instance, comes across as the most grounded and least spiritual of the arts, since it mostly deals with mass, weight, and space rather than finer sensory forms. But because it's so tangible, architecture can convey elements of spiritual existence that other arts can't quite manage, particularly in how we humans engage with our natural and past surroundings. Think of Egyptian pyramids. They capture the heavy solemnity of death and the stretch towards eternity with their huge scale and geometric precision. Then there are Greek temples. They embody harmony between people and the divine through their proportion and perfect integration with their environment. Gothic cathedrals, on the other hand, reach for transcendence, emphasizing height and turning stone into spaces full of light. Sculpture offers a closer brush with spiritual content since it can show living beings, not just spaces for activities. Greek sculpture hits the peak in this art form because it effortlessly merges spiritual meaning with the sensory through ideal portrayals of the human body. The Greek gods are shown as stunning humans who encapsulate divine perfection without losing that touchable, immediate presence. However, sculpture is kind of limited because it only captures what's outside. It can't quite show the inner dance of thoughts, feelings, and spiritual evolvement that more intricate spiritual experiences have. Painting steps past sculpture's limits by illustrating not just the outer form, but also the inner life through color, light, and composition, hinting at mental states and spiritual journeys. Christian paintings are at their finest when they showcase the divine human connection through depictions of incarnation, redemption, and shifts in spiritual life. Masters of the Renaissance like Raphael and Leonardo managed to capture spiritual themes in their art with unmatched depth and intricacy, all the while keeping things visually appealing and instantly engaging. Yet painting has its limits since it's all about what you can see and doesn't allow for the kind of time-based development that best expresses spiritual ideas. In contrast, music goes beyond these visual confines by existing through time, capturing the flow of inner emotional and spiritual dynamics as they evolve over time, rather than being stuck in one place. Music is unique because it can depict feelings and spiritual journeys instead of just showing physical things or static mental states. This art form taps straight into our personal experiences by setting up patterns that echo the rhythms of our inner lives without the need for pictures or representations. However, this very freedom from having to represent specific things is also music's drawback, since it can't convey the definite content found in more precise spiritual expressions. Poetry steps in as the top art form because it marries the time-based nature of music with clear conceptual content thanks to the power of language. Through poetic language, the entire spectrum of human experience can be expressed, all the while keeping that sensory immediacy that sets art apart from mere ideas. Epic poetry unfolds tales of outer events along with their deeper spiritual meaning. Lyric poetry delves into one's personal feelings and their evolution, and dramatic poetry showcases the tangible clash between personal goals and the realities around us. Still, since poetry leans heavily on language, it brushes up against the realm of conceptual thinking, hinting at a move from a purely aesthetic experience to philosophical understanding. Hegel's deep dive into different art forms highlights both their unique triumphs and how they systematically interlink within the bigger picture of humanity's cultural evolution. Every art style taps into certain ways of expressing beauty and meaning, but each also shows its limitations, pointing to even better ways to convey spiritual ideas. The history of art follows this same pattern found in Hegel's broader philosophy, where it progresses from direct material expression to more nuanced spiritual themes, eventually reaching understanding that goes beyond just aesthetics. But this journey isn't about tossing aside past achievements. Rather, it's about incorporating them into richer cultural expressions. Today's aesthetic theorists are still grappling with many of the questions that Hegel's comprehensive framework sheds light on, such as how form and content relate, the ties between aesthetic appeal and intellectual value, and the place of art in democratic settings. Even if you don't buy into all of Hegel's specific ideas about how art forms have evolved, his systematic way of thinking offers a treasure trove of insights for making sense of the intricate ties between our sensory experiences of art, cultural significance, and spiritual growth. Part 18. The experience of feeling separate. Hegel's idea of alienation is one of his most important lasting ideas about what it means to be human. You can't really get the full picture unless you think about it as part of how he saw consciousness and society growing and changing over time. Alienation isn't just about feeling unhappy or critiquing unfair systems. It's an essential step in how we become aware of ourselves and our freedom. Through experiencing alienation, we learn that quick and easy connections aren't enough, pushing us to seek better ways of being recognized and realizing who we are. Grasping Hegel's take on alienation shows its dual nature. It's a struggle, but also a crucial path to growth. Alienation happens when you come across things you've created that feel strange and controlling rather than liberating. This can happen in all sorts of areas of life: how we relate to nature, how society functions, the culture we create, and even our own thoughts. What connects every type of alienation is this sense of feeling outside of yourself, where things that come from human effort seem to have a mind of their own, even holding us back. People who feel alienated sense they're being pushed around by things they can't get a grip on, even though these forces are actually the products of human work and could be managed consciously. The simplest kind of alienation happens between our awareness and the world around us, where we see things as just there rather than shaped by our thinking. Everyday thinking treats the world as if it's completely separate from our minds, missing the point that we actually help create objectivity through our thoughts. This results in a naive belief that we're just passively observing a world that's totally apart from any human influence. In this state, people don't get how their inner power to shape the world is being ignored, leading them to miss out on truly understanding themselves or their surroundings. Social alienation is when our systems and customs seem like outside forces limiting us, instead of tools for shared freedom. Things like the law, economy, politics, and culture can end up looking like barriers rather than means for us to gain mutual understanding and fulfill ourselves. This is a big issue in today's world where complicated systems hide how they rely on our involvement and approval. People often feel they're at the mercy of impersonal forces, like the market, red tape, and tech, seemingly running on their own terms, not ours. When it comes to religion, alienation is a big deal because it turns our human qualities and dreams into something belonging to powerful divine beings. Religious thinking often puts infinite traits such as power, wisdom, and goodness onto these beings while seeing humans as weak and flawed. Hegel refers to this as the unhappy consciousness, recognizing the split between knowing infinite value and enduring our limits. While religious alienation keeps the notion of unlimited human potential alive, it makes it seem like it's not inherently ours. Cultural alienation arises when our cultural achievements feel more like relics of past glory instead of ongoing expressions of human creativity. Today's fast-paced changes can make old traditions seem outdated and new cultural expressions scramble to gain acceptance. People might feel disconnected from their roots without having developed new ways to engage with culture meaningfully. Schools and universities sometimes make us feel disconnected by presenting cultural works as things to be merely absorbed rather than prompting us to actively participate in creating culture. Philosophical alienation happens when thinking becomes detached from real-life experiences, leading to abstract ideas that don't seem relevant to actual human issues. This can show up in different ways, whether it's through theories that see reality as only a concept or methods that boil human experience down to just our senses and instincts. We only truly overcome this kind of alienation when our thinking acknowledges its roots in real human life and returns to it. This demands a type of philosophy that is both carefully structured and genuinely concerned with human existence, managing to be precise with ideas without losing touch with the experiences that give rise to philosophical questions in the first place. However, Hegel argues that alienation isn't always bad and plays an important role in human growth. It can't be skipped over or quickly resolved. Alienation pushes our minds to see the shortcomings in our close relationships and nudges us towards a clearer understanding of ourselves and better societal structures. Without feeling this separation from family, community, traditions, and our initial roles in society, we wouldn't develop the critical view necessary for real moral introspection and making independent choices. In a similar way, communities won't push for reforms and political change unless they feel alienated from current social structures. Overcoming alienation doesn't mean going back to how things were before we felt it. Instead, it involves reaching what Hegel calls mediated immediacy, which keeps the benefits of this detached thinking while surpassing its downsides. This means building systems and practices where people can see themselves within their social environment while also respecting the complexity today's world demands. It's not about getting rid of all differences and separations, but creating connections that truly express human freedom instead of snuffing it out. Thus, overcoming alienation is a continuous process rather than a final destination. Modern debates in psychology, sociology, political theory, and cultural criticism continue to rely on Hegel's thoughts on alienation, expanding them to tackle new situations and challenges. Diving into Hegel's detailed examination of alienation offers helpful insights for understanding current forms of separation and imagining more fulfilling human relationships and social frameworks. Part 19. Essentially, Hegel believed that to truly grasp the ever-changing and complex nature of reality, philosophy needed to develop a way of thinking born directly from the subject matter it explored, rather than slapping on some outside method. He insisted that the process of philosophical thought is actually a part of reality and can't be separated from the results it produces. This led to what he called speculative thinking, a type of thoughtful examination that's both descriptive of reality and plays a role in its actual formation. Traditional philosophical methods often draw a line between the thinker and what's being thought about, needing some way to connect personal ideas with the real world. Approaches that focus on experience as knowledge's root often stumble when trying to bridge the gap from personal, sensory experiences to broader, universal truths. On the other hand, those that lean on reasoning have a tough time explaining how rational thoughts apply to the unpredictable, natural world around us. Kantian philosophy attempted to fix these issues by looking at what makes experience even possible. But this brought up new questions about how we perceive reality versus the reality that exists independently of perception. Hegel aimed to bypass these issues by suggesting that thinking and being aren't two separate entities that need to be linked. Rather, they're facets of a single evolving process. His view was that reality is rational not because it fits within some outside logical framework, but because it forms and understands itself through rational thinking. Therefore, according to Hegel, the method of philosophy cannot be separated from its content, since thinking rationally shapes the core of philosophical inquiry. Genuine philosophical thought isn't simply about logic or psychology, but about the essential structure of reality itself. Speculative thinking, as Hegel described, doesn't just dismiss incorrect ideas outright, like abstract negation might, but instead sees every mistaken belief as containing a grain of truth worth preserving. Its flaws are addressed and enhanced understanding follows. This leads to a growth process where each phase of thought arises from the contradictions of the past and evolves with better insights. Instead of moving in a straight line, philosophical progression involves a circular journey, revisiting initial ideas with newfound understanding. Each philosophical idea or category brims with tensions that push thinking to evolve into more refined concepts, which in turn circle back to their foundational origins for deeper enrichment. Ultimately, Hegel's philosophy insists that no idea stands alone. Its validity comes from its connections to a broader system of knowledge. No single concept can be fully grasped without considering its role within the entire network of philosophical thought. The truth of any claim hinges not on some external criteria or its apparent obviousness, but on where it fits in the full scope of human understanding. Philosophy, when you dive into it, has this systematic vibe that keeps you from just cherry-picking concepts or principles without thinking about their interconnections. Now, Hegel's way of being systematic isn't about slapping on some outer logical template to philosophical stuff. Instead, his system sort of grows naturally from the inside out. It's all about how the concepts themselves have these internal contradictions and shifts. They create their own journey, figuring out their antagonisms and settling them in a way that leads to sharper ideas. So when you're doing this philosophical thinking thing, you've got to be patient, letting ideas unfold in their own time rather than jamming them into neat boxes or rushing to wrap things up how you want. Hegel's speculative style also demands a unique way of using language to convey the ever-changing and conflicting nature of how concepts evolve. Everyday language and standard logic just don't cut it. They're built for stable terms, solid relationships, which falls short when you've got concepts that are fluid and constantly changing. So when using Hegelian language, you've got to capture the essence of identities and differences, how opposites can unite, and how ideas sort of propel themselves forward without getting lost in either paradoxes or mystical mumbo-jumbo. This linguistic juggling act is a big reason why folks find Hegel's writing so tough to crack. The insights you gain from speculative thinking are intertwined with the journey it takes to get there, since the process itself is the real philosophical breakthrough. Learning to think this way isn't about gobbling up philosophical facts. It's about developing skills for breaking down concepts and grasping their system-wide implications. Hegel's philosophy is all about learning and transformation, not just loading up on knowledge about reality. The aim is to engage in the rational dialogue through which reality comes to understand itself. Even today, philosophers grapple with many of the challenges Hegel's speculative method tackles, like how method ties into content, the tricky business of building a philosophical system, and how contradiction fits into the rational thought process. Whether or not you buy into Hegel's specific takes on speculative thinking, his structured approach offers some cool insights into what makes philosophical reflection tick and how it connects with other kinds of logical exploration. Part 20, the ongoing impact. Even 200 years after Hegel passed away, his ideas are still shaping how we think and act in the world, in ways that nobody could have guessed based on the debates he sparked in his own time. His concepts have been used, tweaked, and even taken apart by groups as varied as communist theorists, existentialists, philosophers of mind, feminists, post-colonial experts, and those in the neuroscience field. This broad influence highlights not just how all-encompassing Hegel's original work was, but also how relevant the issues he tackled remain today, and how his thinking still offers tools for addressing modern challenges. Grasping Hegel's ongoing legacy means seeing both how his ideas have been passed down directly and how they've influenced others who took them in new directions. Perhaps the clearest path of Hegel's influence travels through Karl Marx. Various socialist and communist ideas that emerged from Marxist thoughts kept the dialectical framework from Hegel's philosophy of history, but they focused on real-world, material conditions rather than pure consciousness. In the 20th century, revolutionary movements across Russia, China, Cuba, and other developing regions took cues from Marxist theories, which showcased distinctly Hegelian ideas like conflict, disconnection, and moving toward more freedom for people. Even when these movements shifted away from Hegel or Marx's original theories, they still used methods of analysis and strategies influenced by dialectical thought. Existentialism, on the other hand, presents a mixed relationship with Hegelian philosophy. It both draws from and pushes back against Hegel's systematic thinking. Søren Kierkegaard, who's often tagged as the first existentialist thinker, crafted his whole philosophical stand as an opposition to what he deemed the overly abstract and falsely unified view of Hegel's philosophy. Yet Kierkegaard's focus on personal truth, living existence over sheer essence, and committed passion versus mere reflection can be seen as expanding on some of the Hegelian ideas about the real nature of spiritual life. Similarly, existential figures in the 20th century like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir tapped into Hegelian ideas about consciousness, awareness, and freedom, while they opted for more narrative and experience-based methods, leaving systematic approaches behind. Psychoanalysis offers another avenue of Hegelian impact, notably through Jacques Lacan. He leaned on Hegelian ideas to put a fresh spin on Freud's theories about the unconscious mind. Lacan's take on the master-slave dialectic as a key part of our psychological growth left its mark on many analysts. Concepts such as acknowledgement, disconnection, and how language shapes our thoughts became cornerstones in current psychoanalytic ways of understanding how people develop, relate, and engage with their culture. Even those in the psychoanalytic field who steer clear of Lacan's views often use ideas rooted in Hegelian thinking. In feminist theory, Hegel's thoughts are both critiqued and adapted to help explain gender dynamics and the fight for women's rights. Simone de Beauvoir's idea of women being the second sex leans on Hegelian structures of recognition and otherness. Thinkers like Susan Buck-Morss have even suggested that the Haitian Revolution might have shaped Hegel's initial ideas about dominance and submission. Today's feminist scholars find Hegelian concepts useful when looking at how patriarchal systems work, though they also point out the male-centric leanings in his writings and his shortcomings in theorizing about gender differences. This piece shows how Hegel's ideas still pack a punch in today's social and political theory circles. When we talk about post-colonial theory, Hegelian influence stands strong, even though it's been critiqued for assuming a Europe-centered view of history. Frantz Fanon, in his book Black Skin, White Masks, uses Hegel's concept of the master-slave dynamic to delve into the mental effects of colonial rule and the fight against it. Modern post-colonial scholars like Homi Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak continue to tap into Hegelian ideas, while pointing out his failure to fully acknowledge cultural diversity and specific historical contexts. This back and forth highlights both the relevance and the shortcomings of Hegel's ideas in making sense of today's world dynamics. In the field of analytic philosophy, which mostly went a different direction from German idealism, there's been a rekindling of interest in Hegel-like themes. Thinkers such as John McDowell, Robert Brandom, and Terry Pinkard suggest that Hegelian thoughts, covering how the mind connects with the world, how rationality is social, and how concepts evolve, are helpful in tackling modern-day questions in areas like philosophy of mind, knowledge theory, and ethics. This emerging interest hints that the split between continental and analytic philosophy might not be as deep as once thought. Philosophers today are finding that Hegel's structured techniques might work well alongside recent advancements in logic, cognitive studies, and language philosophy. Hegelian themes are even popping up in neuroscience and cognitive science when exploring consciousness, self-awareness, and how we think socially. Research into the brain's role in self-awareness finds that knowing oneself arises from social interactions and hinges on seeing oneself as others might. This backs Hegel's thoughts on self-awareness being shaped by social relations and the importance of recognition in our psychological growth. Although scientists rarely dive into Hegel's philosophy, their findings often align with insights Hegel reached through thought alone. The lasting impact of Hegel's philosophy speaks to its deep roots and its focus on timeless issues like freedom, recognition, alienation, and how individuals relate to their communities. As we face challenges with cultural diversity, income gaps, tech transformations, and environmental issues, Hegel's ideas offer rich ground for thought. His method of looking at contradictions and growth over time helps make sense of complex societal shifts. Rather than dividing social, political, economic, or cultural problems into separate boxes, Hegel's way provides a more unified approach. However, there's acknowledgement of the risks in Hegel's method, especially its inclination toward false harmony and jumping to conclusions. Today's engagement with Hegel's philosophy usually includes a critical look that saves the good stuff, but tosses out the incorrect notions about history, culture, and system completeness. This kind of interaction shows the liveliness of philosophical traditions that are up for reinterpretation instead of sticking dogmatically to old scripts. Hegel's idea that philosophy captures its era in thought form implies that each era must rethink philosophical issues based on current realities. Ultimately, a philosophical legacy is measured not by its precise predictions, but by how its ideas and methods help tackle ongoing human issues. Judging by this measure, Hegel's philosophical ideas have been surprisingly effective in helping people tackle many of today's big societal challenges. It's uncertain, though, if folks in the future will still see Hegel's methods as helpful. Yet the fact that his ideas have endured through 200 years of significant ups and downs in history indicates that he's onto something deeply profound about human nature and how we think rationally.